glucagon and control of blood glucose levels. This is the most common one. I think all of us here, either you have ever encountered somebody suffering from diabetes, or in other words, something to do with diabetes. And so this diabetes, it's not a disease, but it's a condition where the body can no longer regulate the glucose levels in blood. So the remedy is you have to regulate the glucose levels behaviorally. Or you take in insulin externally. So that's where they are restricted from eating this, eating that, eating this, eating that. Then encouraged to do more of exercise. There you are regulating the glucose levels behaviorally. And then after, you take in insulin. So now, the pancreas, it is also a gland. And the other time we say that the pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. Why? Because it produces cells, it produces secretions that can be released through ducts and then through directly to blood. Okay, so that's why it is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. So if you study this pancreas, not all cells of the pancreas do secrete this hormone and this hormone and the other one, the somatostatin. But there are specific hormones within the pancreas, and if you observe them, okay, they look like islands, okay, like an island or islands within a pancreas. And so when this guy, he was a German scientist, I think German, yeah, he was a German scientist. He was the one who first hypothesized, who first saw these cells, and he described them as islands within the pancreas. And so he named them islets of Langerhans. So it is a cluster of cells that are found within the pancreas. Now these cells, they are of three types. We have the beta cells, the alpha cells, and the delta cells. I know you might be knowing this, you might have ever heard of this, but not this. That's why you're here. So they have three types of cells. And now these cells, they are the secretory cells. They are the ones that do secrete the hormones, whereby the beta cells do secrete insulin, okay? And then the alpha cells do secrete glucagon hormone, okay? So the glucagon is secreted by the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans, okay? Then the insulin is secreted by the beta cells of islets of Langerhans. Then these delta cells, the third cells, they do secrete the hormone called somatostatin hormone. This one, okay? It is secreted by the delta cells. Now this hormone, it serves to block the secretion of both insulin and glucagon from adjacent cells. Because not all the time you should secrete these hormones. You should secrete glucagon, you should secrete insulin. Okay? Because remember, the body has to economize. You cannot keep on secreting. So when these hormones are not needed, then there will be a high level of somatostatin hormone. Now this is an inhibitory hormone. This one. Okay? You find it in other homeostatic pathways. such as the control of secretion of growth hormone. You find it there. So now this one is an inhibitory hormone that in high levels, okay, it inhibits the secretion of insulin hormone and the glucagon hormone. And it is produced by the delta cells of the islets of Langerhans. Okay? Now, the production of these two hormones, these ones, the insulin and the glucagon, it antagonizes. It is an antagonism. That if you produce glucagon hormone, then you should be able to inhibit the beta cells from producing insulin hormone. Similarly, when you produce insulin hormone, then you should be able to inhibit the alpha cells from producing the glucagon hormone. Because these two hormones do antagonize each other in glucose homeostasis. Okay? You produce whenever they are needed. And when you need glucagon, then you cannot need insulin. And when you need insulin, you cannot need glucagon. Okay? So let's see how they are able to control the glucose homeostasis within your body. So usually in homeostasis, this is a concept, this is a cheating code. There will always be a stimulus. Okay? And whenever we are marking, we usually mark where the stimulus is. And in this case, the stimulus is rise in blood sugar levels, blood glucose levels. Okay? For instance, after somebody has eaten a meal rich in carbohydrates. Okay? For example, you know the white bread and a brown bread. So if you take the white bread, it has a high glycemic index. So there will be an influx of glucose in blood. So there will be a rise in glucose levels where beyond the normal levels. And so the rise in glucose levels, it will be detected by the glucose receptors. So you can say glucoreceptors within this pancreas. And so if you detect the rise in glucose levels, then it's okay. Then if you detect the rise in glucose levels, okay, then you stimulate the beta cells in the pancreas to release the insulin hormone. Now this insulin hormone is responsible to restore back, so that to bring down the levels of glucose to the normal levels. And how is it done? Obviously, you produce it in the pancreas, but it has its effect is not in the pancreas. So it has to be transported in the circulatory system from the pancreas to the target organs. Okay? And the target organ in this case, it is the liver. Okay? Or the body cells. For example, the muscle cells. And so when it binds to the insulin receptors in the liver and the muscle cells, then different reactions will occur. Okay? Different processes will occur. And those processes will bring down the glucose levels to normal levels. And what are they? Number one, you promote the cellular uptake of glucose levels. Okay? Remember, the glucose level is in blood. Now, why should you maintain the glucose levels in blood constant? The glucose is osmotically active. And so if your glucose being osmotically active, if you have high levels of glucose in blood, then more water is going to be absorbed into blood. So you increase the blood volumes. Okay? And if you increase the blood volumes, then you increase the blood pressure way above what the heart can accommodate. So you'll be straining the heart muscles. Okay? You'll be straining the heart muscles. We are going to see the regulation of blood volume, the RAS system. We are going to see it. So to avoid that, then you should bring back the normal levels of glucose. You should restore the normal levels. And how do you do that? One, you promote uptake. These cells, they do uptake, they do absorb glucose from blood, okay, and convert it into glycogen, for instance, which is osmotically inactive and stored within these very cells. Even in the liver, the same thing happens. Okay? Then the next thing is you slowly convert glucose into glycogen breakdown into it is the reverse. Glucose levels decline slowly, glycogen breakdown into the liver. Okay? Insulin, it declines. Now, I think this is a mistake. Okay? This is a mistake. The aim is to restore. The aim is to bring down, okay, the glucose levels. Is that okay? And so you cannot break down glycogen into the liver. In other words, it is the reverse. You convert this glucose, okay, into glycogen in the liver, and then you store it for storage. So it is the reverse. Sorry for this. Then the remaining glucose within the liver is converted into fats. Okay? Remember, the aim is to restore, the aim is to bring down the glucose level. And so what do? You promote the conversion of glucose into non-carbohydrate compounds. And one of them is fats. And by doing all this, then you'll be restoring the glucose levels. The glucose levels in blood, they will be restored back to normal. And the normal levels is 90 milligrams per 100 mils of blood. In other words, if you get 100 mils, you should have there 90 milligrams of glucose. So if it goes way above this, then this one is going to occur. Now, how about if the glucose levels decrease way below the normal levels? Then still the glucose receptors, okay, in the pancreas, they will detect that. And so if they detect that, then they will stimulate the alpha cells within this pancreas to secrete a hormone. And which hormone? It is a glucagon hormone. Okay? Now this hormone, it reverses all this. It antagonizes the effect of insulin hormone. Okay? And so by antagonizing that, then you bring back the levels of glucose to normal. Is that okay? And so what do? You stimulate the conversion of glycogen to glucose. Now do you see that is the reverse? So you convert glycogen to glucose. And this one is done in the liver. And so this glucose now it is shunt. Is it shunted or shunt? Revise your English. Into the bloodstream so that you now restore the normal levels of glucose in blood. Number 2, breakdown of fats, gluconeogenesis, formation of glucose from non-glucose compounds. Okay? So that you increase the levels of glucose in blood. Okay? Number 3, you can reduce the rate of metabolism. Also, this insulin, it increases the rate of metabolism within these cells. Okay? So that you respire much glucose so that you bring it down to the normal levels. But this glucagon, for it reduces, okay, the metabolic rate such that the levels of glucose within blood is maintained. Now, how about people who can't do this? They are the ones who suffer from diabetes. That is the condition that we call diabetes. And we have two types of diabetes. The first one is diabetes mellitus, and then diabetes insipidus. Now with mellitus, it is due to failure to maintain the glucose levels, to regulate the glucose levels in blood. But diabetes insipidus is due to failure to maintain the water levels in blood. And insipidus is due to complications to do with ADH. But this one, complications to do with insulin. So perhaps you can call it an endocrine disorder instead of calling it a disease, like what I said. Most people call it a disease, but it is not a disease. Why? Because a disease can be cured, but this one is a disorder. Okay? And so it is caused by a deficiency in insulin production. There are two things. Okay? A deficiency in insulin production or decreased response to insulin, okay, by the target tissues. Now, there are two things. In one person, he or she might be able to produce enough insulin, enough of it. The alpha cells are working properly. Sorry, the beta cells are working properly. Okay? But the receptors that respond to insulin cannot perceive, cannot detect the insulin. Okay? And so that person will suffer from diabetes. Then in another person, okay, here the beta cells might be having issues. Which issues? They cannot produce, they cannot secrete, okay, the insulin hormone. And so if you can't secrete insulin hormone, then even if your receptors are working like how, then you cannot receive, okay. And so if you can't receive the hormone, then you won't be able to regulate the glucose levels. And so in all, there will be an elevated levels of glucose in blood. And so because of this, those are the types of diabetes mellitus that we have. Now this one, it is type 1. This is the insulin dependent. This one depends on insulin. Okay? And in this person, the person is not able to produce insulin. Why? Because the beta cells in the islet of Langerhans, they are damaged, they are destroyed, and it is an autoimmune disorder. Okay? The immune system damages or destroys the beta cells in the islets of Langerhans, in the pancreas. Okay? And so, if the cells are damaged, then you cannot produce insulin. Okay? And usually it is caused by the aflatoxins, I think. You remember, there was one saga where Kenya refused to import Ugandan maize. And the reason they gave was, it is highly accumulated with aflatoxins that is above the RDA from the food, the recommended value, okay, of aflatoxins in maize. It was above. So they were right. Why? Because these aflatoxins can end up damaging your beta cells. Okay? And so if they damage your beta cells, then you cannot produce insulin. And so if you can't produce insulin, then you suffer from diabetes mellitus. Okay? Now what are aflatoxins? They are chemicals that are produced by fungi. So you people who have poor post-harvesting stages, eh? You leave your crops, you leave your harvests to be rained on, you poorly store them, the fungi will grow on your harvests. And so when the fungi grow, then they will produce aflatoxins which will keep on accumulating. accumulating within that harvest. Okay, and so when you come and take it, then you take high aflatoxins, which may end up having such damaging your beta cells. And so people always take care of what you eat. Those of you who eat cold power, cold power, CP, always take care of how CP has been stored. Then type 2 diabetes. Now this one doesn't depend on insulin, but rather the receptor on the cells, or the receptor molecules, the insulin receptors on the cells and on the liver, okay, cannot respond to insulin. Here you produce enough insulin, but it cannot bind to the receptors. Okay? And so if insulin cannot bind to the receptors, then there is no way how you're going to respond, how it is going to induce its effects. And so you'll be unable to regulate your glucose levels. Now, what are the causes of this? Now here, this is where obesity comes in. If you know you are obese here, you have high chances of suffering from diabetes. Why? The obesity is a positive energy balance. You produce too much fats than what your body can accommodate, than what your body wants. So now these fats, they are deposited on your organs. Okay? And so when they are deposited on your organs, then they will end up blocking these insulin receptors. And so you'll be producing insulin normally, like us, but the insulin cannot attach on the insulin receptors. And so if the insulin cannot attach on the insulin receptors, then you won't see any physiological effects of insulin in your body. And so you'll be unable to regulate the glucose levels. Now, unfortunately, if this type 1, if this persists, now this one can be healed, this one can be cured. If you regulate your glucose levels, if you begin exercising, if you regulate your food, what you are taking in, you become active, this one can be cured. Okay? The other fat deposits can be eliminated from the receptors and you begin receiving the insulin. But if this one persists, then this can end up damaging the beta cells. And so the type 1 advances, so that the type 2 advances to type 1 diabetes. Okay? And now if it advances to this level, then here you have nothing to do about it. Okay? Apart from praying to God, making regular exercises, and injecting insulin on a daily basis.